Hi and welcome. My name is Tolan and I'm the co-founder of Productivity Me. In this video, we're going to look at how to use the fill handle and other tools to replace formulas from a nearby cell or group of cells. We'll look at this using a spreadsheet for a company which has costs, revenues, and profits. So if you're interested, join us for that. If you want to follow along, go ahead and open up exercise file 04.02. All right, so as we've perhaps used before in the course, we have an example of a company which maybe has 4 different seasons. Perhaps they're a fashion company and they have revenue, costs, and we want to figure out the profit that they've made. So if you want to follow along, go ahead and open up exercise file 04.02 and you'd have that worksheet on your screen. Okay, so now in the last video, we looked at the idea of the different orders of operations, right? So we looked at the different things like sum, or addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Now, if we wanted to calculate the profit for this spring session or this spring sales, right, we would essentially want to take the revenue and subtract the costs. And in the last video, we looked at, well, we could hard code it. So we could basically say 140 minus 65, and that would give us 75. Or rather than putting these hard-coded values, we could also use cell references. So we could say, well, we'd like to take this cell value and then subtract this cell value here. And once we press the enter key, it would be updated. So say that this were to change to 150, perhaps we update it, then our profit would also be updated. So again, one of the advantages of using cell references is that if any of the values for that specific cell change, then your underlying formulas would also change. So that can be kind of useful to calculate the profit by using cell references. Another advantage of using cell references rather than hard-coded values is if we were to say, take 140 minus 65, we can use our fill handle and we can pull that value over. But if we go ahead and pull that value over, it's going to bring that same formula, that of 140 minus 65. And in this column, in that column C for the summer sales, the revenue was actually 200 and the costs were 80. So this value here of 140 minus 65 would be incorrect. So I'm gonna hit delete to delete that. But again, if we were to use cell references, we would hit the equal sign and then we can either type in the cell value. So I'm gonna type in the value of B2 here. So B2, and then I'm going to use the subtraction sign or the minus sign there. And then you can either type in the value here of B3, or you could click on that cell with your cursor. Either of those would work. And then once you're done entering the formula, you would hit enter and it would calculate. So as we discussed earlier in the course, you can use a fill handle. And the fill handle you could drag down or you could drag right. What we're going to do is we're going to drag it to the right one. And you'll notice that what happens is Excel uses what's called a relative reference. So it's basically saying that, okay, we're going to take the value in this cell and then subtract this. And it's going to give us, in this case, the value of 75. But here, rather than subtract that same value of B2 minus C2, it's saying, well, I'm going to take the relative position, that of column C, and I'm going to take that second cell, so that cell of C2, and I'm going to subtract C3, and then I'm going to give the result of 120. Now, what if we were to want to calculate it for this cell, right? So it's 250 minus 100 should be 150. So we could, again, drag it over. Maybe we'll even drag it over to this next cell and see what happens. So again, Microsoft Excel says, well, we don't actually want to calculate the value of C2 minus D2 in this cell because this is the column D. So we actually want to take the relative value, that of cell D2, and subtract that in row 3 of D3. So D2 minus D3 is equal to 150. Same with this cell. So we're not actually subtracting the values here in column C or column D. We're actually now in column E. So we would subtract the value from column E2 or we would take the value from column E2 and we would subtract the value of E3 and we would get 300. And that's exactly what this does. So in summary, I'm going to delete these. What you can do is if you're using relative cell references, you can just drag over and boom, it would automatically populate. Now the same is true here. So you could basically say, well, I want to take 140 and then we're going to add 200, we're going to add 250, and we're going to add 500, and then we'll have the total revenue for these 4 seasons of 1090. But if we were to drag that down, it would again be 1090. So what we want to do instead is we want to use the cell references. So we could say this cell plus this cell plus this cell plus this cell, and that would work. And then we can drag it down and it would be relative. Or, as we'll discuss in a later video, there's an actual formula you can use called the sum formula. So you could say the sum, let me do that a little bit slower. So you would type the equal sign, and then there's these things called formulas, and the formula we would want to add a bunch of different cells together would be sum, as in S as in Sam, U as in umbrella, and then M as in Mary. We're going to put an open bracket, and then we're going to take the individual cells we want. And there's, of course, different ways to use the sum function that we'll discuss in a later video. But we take those values and we add them up, and it's equal to 1090. Alternately, we could say, let's take the sum, and we could just take our cursor and drag over the cells that we want to include in this function. And you'll notice that it's essentially giving us a range. So it's saying we want to include cell B2 to E2. We'll close the parentheses, and then it will give us 1090. Then if we go ahead and we drag that down with the fill handle, it will give us the total value for revenue and the total value for costs and the total value for profit, which is essentially saying I'm going to add up all these, I'm going to add up all these, I'm going to add up all these. Alternatively, just for mathematical reasons, we could basically take this and subtract this value here, and that would give us the same answer. Now, if you wanted to take an average, we'll discuss this in a later video, but you could either, you could basically say, I want to take this value. Well, you'd have to use parentheses, right? But you would basically say that you want to add all these values up and then you want to divide them by a certain number. Or, as we'll discuss later, you can actually use an average function. So again, you would say, I want to take the average of these 4 cells. You would bring that, and the average would be 272.5. You would drag it down, and you could see what the average costs were over your year and the average profits. So in this video, we really just wanted to focus on 2 things. The first was of reinforcing the idea of using cell references. So rather than hard coding the values of 140 minus 65, which would give us the right profit, we wanted to actually use cell references. So we wanted to say, I'd like to take this cell value and subtract this cell value. And then by doing that, let's just delete all of this. By doing that, we can then take the fill handle and we can drag it over, and it would give us the appropriate amount in each individual cell, right? Which is pretty cool. We can also take that and we can apply it here. So we could say, I'd like to take this value and add it to this value and add it to this value and add it to this value. We can bring it down. So not only can we bring it to the right, but we can also bring it down. Then we touched very briefly on the sum function, which we'll cover in more detail. But we basically said, I want to sum this specific range, and then we can bring it down. Or, as we'll discuss in a later video, we could take an average. We could take this average of these 4 values, and then we could drag it down. That too would work. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to go ahead and look at the idea of applying the formulas based on the cell's context. So join us for that in the next video, and we will see you again soon. As always, thanks for watching.